History is a lie agreed upon, but the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves to survive. In 1932, a man promised to lead America. He looked like a titan. He sounded like a savior. But underneath the bespoke wool suit, 10 pounds of cold steel were bolted to his useless legs. Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't just manage a country. He managed the most primal human emotion, fear. But to master yours, he first had to conquer his own. Welcome to Psyche of Power. Today, we peel back the skin of the New Deal to find the raw nerves of a psychological warrior. This is the anatomy of fear management. This is how a paralyzed man became the architect of the modern world. March 4, 1933. America wasn't just broke, it was psychologically broken. The collective ego of the nation had suffered a total collapse. This is what psychologists call learned helplessness. When every effort fails, the brain stops trying. The American dream had become a night terror. Then came the voice. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, a paradox, a psychological sleight of hand. He wasn't talking about economics. He was performing a mass exorcism. He was identifying the enemy not as poverty, but as the reaction to poverty. Act 1. The Mask of the Wounded Healer. To understand FDR, you have to understand the deception. He was the greatest actor never to win an Oscar. In 1921, the golden boy of the Democratic Party was struck by polio. In an instant, the world's most athletic aristocrat was reduced to a torso. The medical verdict was final. You will never walk again. For most, this is the end of the ego. For Roosevelt, it was the birth of a secondary persona. He spent years trying to move a single toe. He failed, but in that failure, he discovered something terrifyingly powerful: the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect states that humans remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. FDR's paralysis was his ultimate uncompleted task. He became obsessed with the appearance of completion. If he couldn't walk, he would manufacture the illusion of movement. He weaponized his own tragedy. He made a deal with the press. Don't photograph the chair. And they didn't. Why? Because the public wanted to be deceived. This is terror management theory, TMT. When faced with the existential threat of the Depression, the public sought a heroic figure to buffer their death anxiety. FDR understood TMT better than the psychologists who named it decades later. He knew that if he showed weakness, the national psyche would shatter. The braces weren't just medical tools. They were the skeleton of a god he was building, a god that didn't feel pain. He adopted the archetype of the wounded healer, a concept explored by Carl Jung, the idea that only those who have suffered can truly heal. Cognitive reversal, Fa 1. You think he was a man of the people. No, he was a Machiavellian aristocrat who used his disability to traitor his way into power. He didn't sympathize with the poor because he was good. He sympathized because he had been humbled by his own biology. He used his broken body to bridge the gap. He played the American public like a grandmaster. His fireside chats were the first mass-scale application of parasocial interaction. Before the radio, the president was a distant statue. Now, he was a guest in your living room. He was the voice of Father. He spoke at 100 words per minute. slow, deliberate. He used the frequency illusion. By appearing often and predictably, he became the only stable thing in a chaotic world. But behind the soothing voice, he was running a psychological experiment on a national scale. He was testing the limits of cognitive dissonance. He told the people things were getting better, even when the data said otherwise. He forced the public to hold two opposing ideas. Most people can't handle dissonance. They choose the hopeful lie over the brutal truth. FDR gave them the permission to believe. To find the source of his power, we have to go to Warm Springs. This wasn't just a spa. It was a psychological laboratory. Here, FDR was the lead patient. He created a micro-society where being broken was the norm. This is the social identity theory in action. In this environment, he learned how to lead by vulnerability, but it was a curated vulnerability. He showed them he could swim, so they would believe they could walk. He developed what psychologists call optimism bias. He didn't just hope things would get better. He neurologically refused to accept they wouldn't. This bias became infectious. When a leader refuses to acknowledge defeat, the followers' mirror neurons fire in sync. Confidence is a biological contagion. He loved to drive fast. He loved control. Because for a man who couldn't control his own legs, controlling a machine or a nation was the ultimate compensation. Alfred Adler argued that we are all driven by striving for superiority to overcome felt inferiority. FDR's inferiority was physical. His superiority became global. He was a master of emotional regulation. No matter how bad the news from the front or the markets, he remained a non-anxious presence. In family systems theory, the non-anxious presence is the person who regulates the emotions of the entire group. FDR was the lighthouse for a drowning continent. He didn't have hope. He produced hope. It was an industrial process, as cold and mechanical as the steel on his legs. Imagine the energy required. Every public second, a performance. Every step, a feat of engineering and agony. He gave the people action. It didn't matter if the programs worked perfectly. What mattered was the psychology of agency. By giving people jobs, even make work jobs, he cured the learned helplessness. He restored the internal locus of control. When you are busy, you are less afraid. The New Deal was the world's largest occupational therapy session. The Depression was just the rehearsal. The true test of fear management came with the Second World War. December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. But for FDR, it was a moment of profound psychological clarity. He knew the war was coming. He might have even let the first blow land to unify the American psyche. The ultimate Stockdale Paradox. Admiral Jim Stockdale discovered this in a POW camp, but FDR lived it in the White House. He told the public the truth about the danger, but lied about the possibility of defeat. He shifted the nation's death anxiety from terror management theory away from I am going to die and toward the enemy must die. He funneled the collective fear into productive aggression. He transformed a paralyzed nation into the arsenal of democracy. Look at the big three. Churchill is restless. Stalin is paranoid. FDR is the calm center. Why? Because he was the only one used to being trapped in a chair. His physical confinement had trained him for diplomatic patience. He had learned to move the world without moving his feet. Amafati, love of fate. FDR didn't just endure his paralysis. He loved what it made him. It was his superpower. But the management of a world's fear takes a toll on the manager. The entropy of leadership. His heart was failing. His body was literally exploding under the pressure of the secrets he kept. He was dying, and he knew it. But the mask could not slip, not during a world war. This is the dramaturgical perspective of Irving Goffman. FDR lived his entire life on stage. The backstage was a place of agony and shadows. He hid his illness from the public during the 1944 election. He was a dying man asking for a fourth term. A final, grand deception. Why?
Was it ego?
Or was it the ultimate act of fear management? He believed that if he died before the war ended, the national psyche would collapse again. April 12, 1945. The disabled god finally sat still. "I have a terrific headache," he said. And then silence. When he died, the world didn't just mourn a leader. They felt a parasocial bereavement. They felt like they had lost their own father. Look at the faces of the people. That isn't political grief. That is the existential terror returning. The protector was gone. FDR's greatest legacy wasn't the Social Security Act. It was the psychological infrastructure he left behind. He taught America how to manage fear by acting as if we are strong, as if we are united, as if we cannot fail. But what happens when the illusion becomes the only reality we know? Today, we live in an age of unmanaged fear. We have the information, but we lack the mask. We have traded wounded healers for wounded narcissists. We have forgotten the art of theatrical confidence. Fear is a biological certainty, but management is a psychological choice. The chair didn't define him. His refusal to be seen in it did. He was a man who conquered his own biology to conquer a global catastrophe. He was a liar, a genius, and a savior. At Psyche of Power, we don't look for heroes. We look for the mechanisms of influence. FDR's mechanism was strategic optimism. It was a weapon forged in the fires of personal hell. What is your polio? What is the limitation you are trying to hide? Don't just overcome it. Weaponize it. Use the Zeigarnik effect of your own life to build something legendary. He knew the truth. He knew that fear itself was the only enemy. Because if you control the fear, you control the world. 12 years, 4 terms, 2 global crises, 1 paralyzed man. He redesigned the world from a seated position. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It wasn't a slogan. It was a battle plan. Next time you feel the walls closing in, remember the man in the wool suit and the steel braces. Because the greatest power isn't muscle. It's the ability to keep your head when everyone else is losing theirs. Sleep well, Mr. President. The illusion holds. For now, this has been Psyche of Power. Analyze, adapt, ascend. See you in the next one.